The phone call that changed everything came through on a Tuesday morning in late September. I was standing in my small office on the military base in Stuttgart, Germany, reviewing training schedules for the next week when Colonel Matthews knocked on my door. The look on his face made my stomach drop before he even opened his mouth. "Your son has been arrested for assault at his father's wedding," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "You need to get home immediately." Remember how the coffee mug slipped from my fingers, shattering on the concrete floor. The hot liquid splashed across my boots, but I couldn't feel it. My mind was racing, trying to process what I'd just heard. My sweet Nathan, my 14-year-old boy who once cried for an hour after accidentally stepping on a caterpillar, had somehow hurt someone badly enough to be arrested. At his father's wedding, no less. The same boy who quit the wrestling team last year because he couldn't stand the idea of causing pain to another person, even in a sport. The next 18 hours passed in a blur of emergency paperwork, frantic phone calls to airlines, and that awful flight home where I sat wedged between strangers, my mind conjuring every possible scenario. I hadn't seen my boys in 8 months, the longest deployment of my career. Nathan and I had talked every Sunday when the internet connection allowed, and he'd seemed quiet lately, but I'd chalked it up to typical teenage moodiness and missing his mom. Now I wondered what signs I'd missed across those thousands of miles and spotty video calls. When the plane finally touched down in Denver, I didn't even stop at my apartment. I drove straight to my ex-husband Michael's house in the suburbs, the one we'd bought together 12 years ago when we still believed in forever. The one where I'd taught Nathan to ride his bike in the driveway and planted roses along the fence that Michael had let die after I moved out. As I pulled up, I noticed dark stains on the concrete driveway, and my hands started shaking. That had to be blood. A lot of blood. I rang the doorbell with trembling fingers, and Michael yanked the door open before I could ring twice. His face was twisted with a rage I'd never seen in our 10 years of marriage. Behind him, I could see his parents, his brother James, and his sister Emily arranged like a tribunal in the living room. The bride's parents stood near the fireplace like guards, and in the centre of it all sat Lauren, Michael's new wife, looking like she'd gone 10 rounds with a heavyweight boxer. Her nose was clearly broken, splintered, and bandaged. Both eyes were swollen shut, purple and green bruises spreading across her cheekbones. Bandages covered what looked like scratches or cuts across her forehead and jaw. She was dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, careful not to disturb the medical tape, and making soft, sobbing sounds that seemed to echo in the tense silence of the room. "We're pressing charges," Michael spat at me before I could even speak. "Your son is a monster. Look what he did to her face. Ruined our wedding, traumatized our guests, and brutalized an innocent woman. They should try him as an adult. Lock him up where he can't hurt anyone else." My eyes found Nathan then, sitting perfectly straight in a wooden chair in the corner, surrounded by this mob of angry adults. His knuckles were wrapped in white bandages, swollen and bruised beneath. But what struck me most was his posture. He sat with his chin raised, meeting my eyes directly with absolutely no trace of guilt or regret. If anything, he looked proud. My gentle boy, who used to rescue spiders from the bathtub and carry them outside, looked proud of putting a woman in the hospital. I pushed past Michael and knelt in front of my son, taking his bandaged hands gently in mine. The room erupted in protests, people telling me not to coddle him, that he needed to face consequences, that I was enabling violent behavior. I ignored them all, looking into Nathan's green eyes so like his father's but filled with something I'd never seen before. A hardness, a resolve. "Tell me what happened," I said softly. "Tell me your side of the story." Nathan looked around the room slowly, taking in every face, his grandfather shaking his head in disgust, his Aunt Emily crying quietly in the corner, his Uncle James standing with arms crossed, jaw clenched, the bride's parents glaring at him with undisguised hatred, and Lauren, still playing the victim with her careful tears and dramatic gasps of pain. "You want to know the truth?" Nathan's voice was clear and steady, Not the voice of a child, but of someone who'd been forced to grow up too fast. She's been molesting me for 6 months. That's why I did it. The room exploded instantly. Voices shouting over each other, calling him a liar, saying he was making up disgusting stories to avoid consequences. Lauren wailed louder, her voice muffled by the bandages as she cried out that she'd never hurt anyone, that she'd tried so hard to be a loving stepmother. But I watched her face in that split second before she started her performance, and I saw something flicker there. Fear. Real fear. Nathan pulled out his phone with steady hands and opened a hidden photo album. I caught a glimpse of the screen over his shoulder and my stomach turned violently. The images were exactly what I'd feared. Inappropriate photos that no adult should ever take with a child. My hands started shaking as the reality hit me. This woman, this monster my ex-husband had brought into our children's lives, had been hurting my baby for months while I was halfway around the world, unable to protect him. She said 14-year-old boys always want it, Nathan continued, his voice starting to crack. Said I should be grateful. That I was lucky. That no one would believe me anyway, because she's a woman and I'm a teenage boy. Michael's hands were trembling as he stared at the phone screen. Whose could be anyone, he said, but his voice was hollow, unconvincing. You could have gotten those anywhere. This is just a desperate attempt to justify what you did. Lauren made a grab for the phone, her injuries apparently not severe enough to prevent quick movement. Those are out of context, she started, then stopped abruptly, realizing she'd just admitted the photos were real. We were just... She trailed off, looking around the room for support. Dad, I told you 3 months ago. Nathan's voice was stronger now, anger creeping in. I came to you crying, begging for help. You said she was just being affectionate, that I was misinterpreting things, that I should be glad you found someone who wanted to be part of our family. Michael started stuttering, trying to deny it, but Nathan wasn't done. He turned to his grandfather, my former father-in-law who I'd once considered family. Grandpa, you laughed when Dad told you. You said, lucky boy, wish I had that problem at 14, remember? You were watching the game and drinking beer and you laughed like it was the funniest thing you'd ever heard. The old man's face drained of colour, aging 10 years in seconds. He looked at Lauren, then at his grandson, and something fundamental broke in his expression. The reality of what he'd dismissed, what he'd laughed about, hitting him all at once. Aunt Emily, you told me to stop being dramatic when I tried to talk to you. Nathan's voice was shaking now, tears starting to fall. I pulled you aside at Easter dinner and tried to tell you what was happening. You said I was probably misunderstanding her intentions, that Lauren was just trying to bond with me. You said teenage boys always think everything is about sex. Emily was backing toward the door, tears streaming down her face, shaking her head like she could deny the memory away. Oh God, she kept whispering. Oh God, I thought you were just... I didn't think... Oh God, Uncle James, you said I should be grateful when you overheard me on the phone with my friend. Nathan was standing now, fists clenched. You made jokes about how you wished your stepmom had looked like Lauren when you were my age. You high-fived Dad and said I'd thank him when I was older. James had his head in his hands, shoulders shaking. Jesus Christ, he muttered. I was joking. I didn't know she was actually... I thought you were just complaining about having a stepmom. I never imagined... Grandma, you said boys can't be raped by women. Nathan's voice broke completely on this one. When I asked you hypothetically what happens if a woman forces a boy, you said it's not possible, that men always want it, that it's different than when girls are hurt. Michael's mother collapsed onto the couch, clutching her rosary, praying under her breath. The weight of her words, her casual dismissal of male victims, crashing down on her as she stared at her grandson's tear-streaked face. Every single one of you told me to shut up about it, Nathan said, his voice raw. Every one of you made it clear that no one would believe me or care. So yeah, I handled it the only way I could think of. Because there was one more thing none of you knew. The room fell silent except for Lauren's continued fake sobbing. I held my breath, knowing instinctively that something worse was coming. Nathan wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, smearing tears across his cheek. Last week I caught her coming out of Tommy's room at 2 in the morning. The words hung in the air like a bomb about to explode. Tommy was Michael's 9-year-old son from a brief relationship after our divorce. A sweet, shy little boy who loved dinosaurs and still slept with a nightlight. I felt ice flood my veins. Michael grabbed Lauren by the shoulders, his face transforming from anger to horror. "What did you just say?" he demanded, shaking her slightly. "What were you doing in Tommy's room?" For the first time, Lauren's mask slipped completely. The victim act disappeared, replaced by something cold and calculating. "That little brat came on to me," she snarled, then immediately tried to backtrack. I mean, he was having nightmares. I was just checking on him. These boys are twisting everything, making innocent interactions seem... Her parents, who had been silent until now, erupted. Her mother screamed at her, a primal sound of rage and anguish. "You promised," she wailed. "You went to therapy. You said this would never happen again. We moved states. We changed everything. You promised. Again, never happen again." The words echoed in my mind as the full scope of what we were dealing with became clear. This wasn't Lauren's first time. There had been other children, other families destroyed, other parents who'd believed her tears and lies. Nathan ran upstairs and came back carrying Tommy, who immediately buried his face in his big brother's shoulder. The little boy was trembling, clinging to Nathan like a lifeline. When Michael asked him gently if Lauren had touched him, Tommy nodded against Nathan's shoulder. Then, with shaking hands, he pulled up his pajama shorts. The bruises on his inner thighs were in various stages of healing, some purple, black and fresh, others yellowing around the edges. Finger marks. Adult finger marks on a 9-year-old's legs. The room erupted again, but this time the anger wasn't directed at Nathan. Michael lunged for Lauren, but his brother grabbed him, holding him back. I immediately pulled out my phone and dialed 911, my military training taking over. While I spoke to the dispatcher, giving our address and explaining we needed police and child protective services immediately, Lauren's parents were begging me to hang up. They were offering money, promising to get her help, saying we could handle this as a family. I wasn't listening. My focus was entirely on my boys. Nathan was still holding Tommy, whispering that he was safe now, that no one would hurt him again. My brave, beautiful son who had sacrificed himself to protect a little boy when every adult in his life had failed him. "We're children," Nathan said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We're just children, and every single one of you chose her over us. You chose to believe her tears and her lies because it was easier than accepting the truth. Because admitting the truth would mean admitting you failed to protect us." Lauren suddenly bolted for the bathroom, locking herself inside. I could hear drawers opening, things being moved around, but I was focused on keeping my boys close until the police arrived. I didn't care what she was doing in there. She could flush drugs, destroy evidence, whatever. We had Nathan's photos, Tommy's injuries, and a room full of witnesses who had just heard her essentially confess. 10 minutes later, when the police arrived, Lauren emerged from the bathroom looking calmer. She'd washed her face, removing some of the dramatic effect of her injuries. She tried to spin a story about being attacked unprovoked, about Nathan being mentally unstable, about me coaching him to lie. But the officers had seen this before. They recognized the patterns, the too convenient timing, the rehearsed victim act. They took her away in handcuffs while she screamed about pressing charges, about suing us all, about how we'd ruined her life. Her parents followed behind, her mother still wailing about promises and therapy, and not again. Michael stood in his doorway, looking lost and broken, the wedding band still shining on his finger. I took both boys and left immediately, driving to my best friend Sarah's house across town. She took one look at us and ushered us inside without questions. Her kids were already in bed, and she set up the guest room for us, bringing extra blankets and pillows without being asked. Nathan and Tommy refused to sleep separately, curling up together in the double bed like they used to when they were little. I sat in Sarah's living room until 3 in the morning, filing reports online, sending emails to lawyers, trying to create a paper trail of everything while it was fresh. The adrenaline was wearing off, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion and rage that threatened to consume me. My baby had been suffering for 6 months while I was playing soldier overseas. 6 months of abuse while I was focused on training exercises and deployment schedules. The next morning, my phone rang before 7. Detective Morrison introduced herself and said she needed us at the station immediately. Her voice was professional but urgent, and something in her tone made my stomach drop. I woke the boys gently, helped them dress, and drove to the police station with Sarah following for moral support. The detective led me to a small interrogation room while the boys waited with Sarah and a victim's advocate. She placed a manila folder on the metal table between us and told me to prepare myself. Inside were screenshots from a phone showing text messages between me and Lauren, messages I had never sent. The fake conversations showed me telling Lauren she could discipline Nathan however she saw fit. And one message appeared to give her permission to use physical punishment. Another suggested I trusted her judgment completely regarding what my son needed to learn about becoming a man. The timestamps were from 3 months ago, right when Nathan had first told his father about the abuse. I stared at these fabricated messages, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. Lauren had spent those 10 minutes in the bathroom creating false evidence to implicate me. She was trying to make it look like I had known about and approved of her abuse. The detective watched my face carefully as I insisted I'd never sent these messages, that I'd never even had Lauren's phone number. They took my phone for analysis and told me not to leave town. In the space of an hour, I'd gone from worried mother to potential suspect. Lauren was trying to drag me down with her, to muddy the waters enough that her crimes might get lost in the confusion. I walked out of that station feeling like I was drowning. Sarah drove us straight to the law office of Casey Hartwell, the best family lawyer in the state. Casey took one look at my shell-shocked expression and cleared her calendar. She listened to the whole story, taking detailed notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I told her about the fake messages, she immediately started making calls. Within hours, Casey had filed preservation orders with every major phone carrier and social media company. She explained that Lauren had likely used spoofing apps or edited screenshots, and we needed to act fast to preserve the real records. She also filed requests for Lauren's search history and app download records. If Lauren had researched how to fake messages, we'd find it. The next few days passed in a blur of meetings, phone calls, and legal documents. Child Protective Services arrived to interview both boys. Derek Collins, the CPS worker assigned to our case, was a gentleman in his 50s who clearly had experience with trauma victims. He interviewed each boy separately, taking detailed notes and photographs of Tommy's bruises. Nathan had to write out everything that had happened in his own words. He sat at Sarah's kitchen table for hours, filling page after page with his neat handwriting. Sometimes he'd have to stop, his hand cramping or tears making it hard to see. I'd bring him water, rub his shoulders, tell him how brave he was. Reading his statement later made me vomit twice. The details of what that woman had done to my child were worse than I'd imagined. Tommy's interview at the Children's Advocacy Centre was even harder. The building was designed to look non-threatening, with bright paintings and toys in the waiting room, but we all knew why we were there. They took him back to a special room with cameras while I sat in the lobby, trying not to fall apart. I could hear him crying through the supposedly soundproof door, and it took everything in me not to burst in and grab him. The forensic exam revealed evidence consistent with repeated abuse. The doctor was gentle and professional, but hearing her clinical terms for what had been done to a 9-year-old boy made me want to scream. Tommy came out clutching a teddy bear they'd given him, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. The innocence in his eyes was gone, replaced by a wariness that broke my heart. Meanwhile, my military career was imploding. I received a call from my JAG officer informing me that my security clearance was under review due to the ongoing investigation. The fact that I was being investigated as a potential accomplice to child abuse meant I couldn't return to my duties. 15 years of exemplary service, multiple deployments, commendations for leadership, all hanging by a thread because of Lauren's lies. Casey worked tirelessly to prove the messages were fake. She brought in a digital forensics expert named Corey Adams, who specialized in exposing fabricated evidence. He found that the screenshots Lauren had created contained multiple technical inconsistencies. The The font was wrong for my phone model, the timestamp format didn't match, and the metadata showed they were created after Lauren had locked herself in the bathroom. We also discovered that Lauren had installed a spoofing app at 11:47 p.m. on the night of the wedding, just minutes after I'd called 911. The app could create fake messages from any phone number and make them look authentic in screenshots. It was a smoking gun, but we still had to wait for the legal system to process everything. Lauren posted bail using her parents' money and immediately went on the offensive. Her lawyer filed a restraining order against me, claiming I'd orchestrated the whole situation to gain custody of Tommy. She painted herself as the victim of a jealous ex-wife's scheme, saying I'd coached Nathan to attack her and make false accusations. The local media picked up the story and suddenly my name was all over social media. The harassment started within days. Someone leaked my phone number and address online. Death threats filled my voicemail. People who didn't know anything about the case decided I was a monster who had ruined an innocent woman's wedding. I had to change my phone number twice, and Sarah installed security cameras after cars started slowly driving past her house at all hours. My boys couldn't go to school because of the attention. Nathan tried to return after a week, but kids had seen the news stories. They whispered in the hallways, moved away from him at lunch, called him names I won't repeat. He came home after 2 hours, shaking and crying, saying he couldn't do it. We arranged for home tutoring instead, adding another expense to our mounting bills. The legal bills were astronomical. Every meeting with Casey, every filing, every expert witness cost money I didn't have. I burned through my savings in the first month. Casey reduced her fees as much as she could, but fighting Lauren's well-funded legal team was expensive. I sold my car, emptied my retirement account, even pawned my grandmother's wedding ring. Conrad's family slowly began to fracture under the weight of guilt. Emily sent a letter apologizing for not believing Nathan, her handwriting shaky with emotion. James texted saying he needed space to process everything. Michael's parents stopped answering calls altogether, unable to face what their dismissal had enabled. The family that had once gathered for Sunday dinners and holiday celebrations splintered apart. Michael himself was required to take parenting classes and undergo therapy as part of CPS's safety plan. At first, he was angry and resistant, blaming everyone but himself. But as the evidence mounted and the truth became undeniable, his anger shifted. He started sending short emails asking about Tommy, expressing regret for not protecting him. The wedding ring disappeared from his finger after the first week. 3 weeks into the ordeal, Casey called with a breakthrough. Lauren's previous therapist in Michigan had been ordered to release her records. The files revealed 3 prior victims over the past decade. Each time, Lauren's family had paid for silence, funded therapy, and moved to a new state. The pattern was clear and damning. She was a serial predator who had been protected by wealth and family connections. The prosecutor immediately withdrew the plea deal they'd offered Lauren for simple assault. New charges were filed for each boy, and the prior victims were contacted about testifying. Lauren's lawyer fought viciously to keep the past incidents out of court, but the judge ruled they established a clear pattern of behavior. My son's assault charges were handled in juvenile court with surprising compassion. The judge reviewed all the evidence, including the photos Nathan had taken and the timeline of when he'd reported the abuse to adults. She offered him a diversion program instead of prosecution, 100 hours of community service, awesome, weekly therapy for a year, and monthly check-ins with a probation officer. If he completed everything successfully, his record would remain clean. Nathan threw himself into the requirements with the same determination he brought to everything. Started volunteering at the animal shelter, finding peace in caring for abandoned dogs and cats. The animals didn't judge him or whisper about what had happened. They just needed love and care, which he had in abundance despite everything he'd endured. His therapy sessions were harder. For the first 3 appointments, he sat silently, drawing in a notebook while his therapist waited patiently. On the 4th session, he finally spoke one sentence about feeling dirty all the time, like Lauren's touch had left invisible marks that wouldn't wash off. The therapist gave him special soap to use when the feelings got overwhelming. a physical ritual to help process the psychological pain. Tommy's healing journey was different, but equally difficult. He used dolls in therapy to show what had happened, moving them around a dollhouse while describing Lauren's nighttime visits. His foster placement with Sarah's family was made official when it became clear neither Michael nor I could provide the stable environment he needed while dealing with the legal battles. The online harassment escalated when more details about the case leaked. Someone created fake social media profiles using my name and photos, posting horrible things to make me look unstable. Lauren's supporters, who called themselves Justice for Lauren, organised protests outside the courthouse during hearings. They held signs with my picture calling me a liar and child abuser. Casey documented everything meticulously, building a defamation case alongside our defence. She tracked IP addresses, saved screenshots, and filed police reports for the worst threats. When we proved Lauren herself was behind several fake accounts, violating the no-contact order, the judge finally revoked her bail. Watching her get handcuffed in court while her mother sobbed was the first moment of justice in this nightmare. My military board hearing came 6 months into the ordeal. I sat in dress uniform before a panel of officers who'd known me for years, explaining how I'd been falsely accused while deployed. They reviewed Casey's evidence, the forensic analysis proving the messages were fake, and character statements from my unit. In the end, they maintained my security clearance, but issued a formal reprimand for the negative attention brought to the service. It was the lightest punishment possible, but it still ended any chance of promotion. My career trajectory was permanently altered. I'd gone from a rising officer with a spotless record to someone with an asterisk next to their name. The reprimand would follow me forever, visible to every promotion board and assignment officer. The criminal trial was set for 8 months after the wedding, delayed by motion after motion from Lauren's defense team. They tried everything to get evidence excluded, claiming Nathan's photos were illegally obtained, that Tommy's testimony was coached, that the prior victims were prejudicial. Each hearing meant more time off work, more legal fees, more opportunities for my boys to be re-traumatized. During one particularly brutal deposition, Lauren's lawyer grilled Nathan for 6 hours about every detail of the abuse. They made him describe each incident multiple times, looking for inconsistencies. They suggested he'd misunderstood affection, that he'd wanted the attention, that teenage boys couldn't be victims of women. Nathan answered every question with quiet dignity, never wavering from the truth despite their attempts to break him. Tommy's deposition was conducted differently due to his age, with child advocates present and frequent breaks. But it was still devastating watching him describe Lauren's visits to his room, the things she'd said to keep him quiet, the fear he'd lived with. His little voice explaining how she'd told him bad things would happen to his family if he told anyone made several people in the room cry. As the trial date approached, Lauren's family made one last attempt to avoid court. They offered a settlement that would cover therapy for both boys through college, plus a substantial sum for pain and suffering. The only condition was that we'd have to sign non-disclosure agreements and drop the criminal charges. Casey told them exactly where they could put their money. My boys' voices wouldn't be bought. The trial itself was a media circus. Reporters crowded outside the courthouse every day, shoving microphones in our faces. Lauren's supporters and ours kept separated by police barriers, shouting at each other across the divide. Inside the courtroom, my boys had to face their abuser again, telling their stories to a jury while Lauren sat there, in a conservative dress, trying to look like a victim. Nathan testified with remarkable composure, detailing the abuse without flinching from Lauren's attempts to make eye contact. He explained how she'd groomed him, starting with innocent touches that gradually escalated. He described the threats, the manipulation, the way she'd used his love for Tommy to keep him silent. When asked why he'd attacked her at the wedding, he simply said he'd seen no other way to protect his brother. Tommy testified via closed-circuit television from another room, too traumatized to be in the same space as Lauren. His testimony was heartbreaking in its simplicity. He told the jury about the monster who came to his room at night, how he'd pretend to be asleep but she knew he was awake, how she'd hurt him in ways he didn't have words for. Several jurors were visibly crying by the time he finished. The defense tried every dirty trick imaginable. They brought in experts to claim the boys had false memory syndrome. They suggested I'd planted the ideas in their heads for custody reasons. They even tried to argue that Nathan's attack proved he was violent and unstable, therefore unreliable. But the evidence was overwhelming. The photos, the bruises, the prior victims who bravely testified about their own experiences with Lauren. After 5 days of testimony, the jury deliberated for only 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. Lauren's mother wailed as the verdict was read, but Lauren herself just stared straight ahead, that cold mask finally permanent. The judge sentenced her to 15 years with possibility of parole after 7. It wasn't enough for what she'd done, but it was something. The civil suits followed quickly. We sued Lauren's parents for enabling her behavior, moving her from state to state to avoid consequences. We sued Michael for failing to protect the children in his care. The settlements would ensure both boys had therapy and support for years to come, but no amount of money could give them back their innocence. Nathan finished his community service and continued volunteering at the animal shelter even after his hours were complete. He found purpose in helping creatures who'd been abandoned or abused, seeing his own journey reflected in their recovery. His therapist said it was a healthy way to process trauma, caring for others while learning to care for himself again. Tommy struggled more visibly. The nightmares continued for months, and he developed anxiety around bedtime that required medication to manage. Sarah's family officially adopted him when Michael voluntarily terminated his parental rights, unable to forgive himself for bringing Lauren into their lives. Tommy finally had the stable, protective home he deserved, though the road to healing would be long. I returned to duty eventually, though my career never recovered. I finished out my 20 years and retired quietly, my dreams of making colonel abandoned. But watching my boys slowly reclaim their lives mattered more than any rank. Nathan went back to school his senior year, graduating with honours despite everything. He gave a speech at graduation about resilience that had parents and teachers in tears. The extended family gradually found their way back to some form of relationship. Emily started sending birthday cards again, always with long apologies written inside. James reached out about meeting for coffee, wanting to properly apologise to Nathan face to face. Even Michael's parents eventually wrote, expressing deep regret for their dismissal of Nathan's pleas for help. The wounds would never fully heal, but accountability brought some closure. Michael himself required years of therapy to deal with his guilt. He sent letters to both boys that they weren't ready to read for a long time. When Nathan finally opened his at 18, it was full of apologies, regret, and a father's anguish at failing to protect his children. They've slowly built a tentative relationship, meeting for coffee occasionally, both forever changed by what happened. The case changed laws in our state. Nathan's courage in speaking out, even when no one believed him, led to better training for mandated reporters about male victims of sexual abuse. The foundation we started in Tommy's name provides support for other child victims whose families can't afford quality therapy. Every donation, every family helped, turns our pain into purpose. Lauren serves her time in a prison 2 states away, her family still paying for lawyers to file appeals that go nowhere. Her mother writes occasionally begging for forgiveness I'm not ready to give. Maybe someday, when the boys are older and further in their healing. Or maybe never. Some things don't deserve forgiveness, only justice. Looking back now, 5 years later, I see the moment differently. That phone call that seemed to destroy everything actually saved my boys. If Nathan hadn't found the courage to act when every adult failed him, if he hadn't sacrificed himself to protect Tommy, Lauren would still be hurting children. She'd be in another state with another family, protected by money and lies and people who chose not to say. My son, my brave, beautiful son, did what none of the adults could do. He stopped a predator the only way he knew how. And while I wish with every fibre of my being that he'd never been put in that position, I'm forever grateful for his courage. He saved his brother. He saved future victims. He saved himself. The scars remain physical and emotional. Nathan still sometimes wakes up feeling dirty, reaching for the special soap his therapist gave him years ago. Tommy still needs a nightlight and checks his door locks twice before bed. I still jump when the phone rings unexpectedly, that military bearing never quite recovering from the call that started it all. But we survived. More than that, we've thrived in ways I couldn't have imagined during those dark, early days. Ethan's in college now, studying social work with a focus on helping abuse victims. He wants to be the advocate he needed, the adult who believes children when they ask for help. Tommy's a teenager himself, still in therapy but laughing again, playing soccer, being a kid in all the ways Lauren tried to steal from him. And me, I learned that protecting your children sometimes means accepting that you can't always be there. Means raising them to be strong enough to protect themselves and others when the adults fail. It means believing them, no matter how uncomfortable the truth. It means choosing their safety over your career, your reputation, or family's stöd. Baham's comfort. That Tuesday morning call that seemed to end everything actually began our journey to healing. It brought truth to light, justice to victims, and ultimately, peace to my family. The road was longer and harder than any deployment I'd faced, but we walked it together, and that made all the difference. Some nights when I can't sleep, I think about all the children suffering in silence right now. The ones whose families choose not to see, whose cries for help are dismissed or ignored. I think about the predators protected by wealth and position, moved from victim to victim by families more concerned with reputation than justice. And I pray they find their own Nathan, someone brave enough to stand up and say no more, whatever the cost. Because that's what heroes do. They don't always wear capes, suits, or uniforms. Sometimes they're 14-year-old boys with bruised knuckles and breaking hearts, doing whatever it takes to protect the innocent. Sometimes heroism looks like assault charges and family destruction. Sometimes saving people means being willing to be seen as the villain. My son taught me that. He taught me that love sometimes requires violence, that protection sometimes demands sacrifice, that justice sometimes comes through a child's desperate act when every system meant to protect them fails. He taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear, but action in spite of it. We still have bad days, triggers that bring back memories, moments when the trauma feels fresh and overwhelming. But we also have good days that outnumber them now. Days when Nathan helps other survivors find their voices. Days when Tommy scores a goal and forgets for a moment that monsters exist. Days when I watch my boys support each other and know that nothing, not even Lauren, could break their bond. The family we have now is smaller but stronger, built on truth instead of denial, protection instead of reputation, belief instead of convenient blindness. Sarah, who took us in without question, is more family than blood ever was. The other survivors we've met through support groups understand in ways others can't. Therapists, advocates, and lawyers who believed us when it mattered most are part of our extended chosen family. This is our story. Not one of victimhood, but of survival. Not one of destruction, but of rebuilding. Not one of silence, but of speaking truth to power, even when that power wore a wedding dress and tears. It's a story I never wanted to tell, but one that needed telling. Because somewhere out there, another child is suffering in silence. Another family is choosing not to see. Another predator is counting on that silence. To those children, I say this: you are not alone. Your truth matters. Your safety matters more than anyone's comfort. And sometimes when the adults fail you, you have to save yourself and others however you can. It's not fair, it's not right, but it's survivable. We're living proof of that. To the adults, I say this: listen, believe, act. Don't wait for proof that meets your comfort level. Don't dismiss claims because they're inconvenient or uncomfortable. Don't choose reputation over protection. The cost of disbelief is measured in childhood innocence destroyed, in lives forever altered, in families torn apart by preventable tragedy. And to Lauren, though I know she'll never read this, my son stopped you. A child had to do what adults wouldn't. He bears scars from that choice, but he bears them with pride, because he knows, and I know, and Tommy knows that he's a hero, the kind of hero this world desperately needs more of. The kind who acts when action is dangerous, who speaks when silence is safer, who protects when protection comes at personal cost. That's the legacy of that Tuesday morning phone call. Not destruction, but transformation. Not ending, but beginning. Not victimhood, but victory, hard-won and blood-bought, but victory nonetheless. We survived. We healed. We thrived. And we'll keep telling this story as long as there are children who need to hear it, adults who need to understand it, and predators who need to fear it. Because the truth, once spoken, can never be silenced again. And that's the most powerful weapon we have against those who would hurt our children. Truth, courage, and the unbreakable bonds of love that evil can test but never destroy. That's what we learned from this journey. That's what sustains us still. That's what will carry us forward into whatever comes next. Together. Always together. And always ready to protect those who cannot protect themselves. I often think about the moment Nathan made his decision. He's told me since that he woke up that morning knowing what he had to do. He'd heard Tommy crying in his sleep again, those soft whimpers that had become so common in their house. He'd watched his little brother flinch when Lauren walked past his chair at breakfast. He'd seen the way Tommy's hands shook when she announced it was time to get dressed for the wedding. Nathan had tried everything else. Every adult he'd trusted had failed him. His father, who should have been his protector, had chosen his new wife over his son's safety. His grandparents, aunts and uncles had all dismissed his pleas for help. The system that was supposed to protect children had been deaf to his cries. So he made a choice that would forever change his life but save his brothers. He's described to me how he felt putting on his suit that morning, knowing what was coming. His hands were steady as he tied his tie, the one I'd sent from Germany for him to wear to special occasions. He looked at himself in the mirror and saw not a child, but a warrior preparing for battle. Because that's what our children sometimes have to become when we fail them. Warriors in suits and ties, fighting battles they should never have to face. The wedding itself was held at the Riverside Country Club, the kind of place where Michael and I had once dreamed of having our own reception before military life, and its demands pulled us in different directions. Lauren had chosen it for its elegance, its perfectly manicured gardens, its reputation for hosting the social events of the season. She'd planned every detail meticulously, from the white rose centerpieces to the string quartet that would play during cocktail hour. Nathan sat through the ceremony in the front row, his assigned seat as the groom's older son. He watched his father promise to love and cherish this woman who had been destroying his children for months. He listened to the minister talk about the sanctity of marriage, about two becoming one, about the blessing of blended families. Every word must have felt like acid on his soul, knowing what those hands exchanging rings had done in the darkness of night. He's told me he almost lost his nerve when it came time for the unity ceremony. Lauren had planned this elaborate ritual where all the family members would pour different-coloured sand into a vase, symbolising their lives blending together. When she handed him his container of blue sand, his colour she'd chosen to represent his place in their new family, her fingers brushed his hand in that too familiar way that made his skin crawl. Then he looked at Tommy standing there in his little grey suit holding his container of green sand with trembling hands. His brother's eyes were wide with that fear Nathan had come to recognise, the look that meant Lauren had visited him recently. And in that moment, Nathan's resolve crystallised. He poured his sand slowly, watching it mix with the others, knowing it would be the last thing he did as part of this false family. The reception was where he planned to act. He knew there would be a moment during the father-son dance where attention would be on the dance floor. He'd studied the timeline, memorised the schedule Lauren had posted on the refrigerator for weeks. He knew exactly when the photographer would be focused elsewhere, when the guests would be watching Michael and Lauren's first dance, when he could create the maximum disruption with the minimum collateral damage. But Lauren changed the schedule. Instead of the father-son dance, she announced a special surprise. She called Nathan and Tommy to the front, saying she had adoption papers as a wedding gift. She wanted to officially become their mother, to make their family complete. The crowd awed at the gesture, not seeing the trap she was laying, the final lock on the prison she'd created. Nathan looked at those papers, at the pen she held out with that smile that never reached her eyes, and something inside him snapped. All those months of careful planning evaporated. The rage he'd been controlling, channeling into protection for Tommy, exploded outward. He didn't take the pen. Instead, he spoke the words that would shatter the illusion forever. I don't need a new mother. I have a mother. And you're not her. You're a monster who hurts children. The words rang out across the reception hall, cutting through the soft music and gentle conversation. Guests turned, champagne glasses frozen halfway to lips. Lauren's smile flickered but held as she tried to laugh it off, telling everyone that teenage boys could be so dramatic that Nathan was just having trouble adjusting to change. But Nathan wasn't done. He pulled out his phone and held it up, showing the screen to the crowd. These are pictures she made me take. She comes to my room at night. She's been hurting me for 6 months, and nobody would listen when I tried to tell them. And now she's hurting Tommy too. The reaction was immediate chaos. Guests gasping, some pulling out their own phones to record, others trying to shield children's eyes. Michael rushing forward, grabbing for the phone while shouting at Nathan to stop making a scene. Lauren's parents trying to usher people outside, her mother's voice shrill as she insisted this was all a misunderstanding, a troubled boy acting out. And through it all, Lauren stood there in her designer dress, the one that had cost more than most people's monthly salary, playing the victim with Oscar-worthy skill. She let tears roll down her cheeks, careful not to smudge her professionally done makeup. She reached out to Nathan with trembling hands, voice breaking as she asked why he would say such terrible things, what she had done to make him hate her so much. That's when Nathan snapped completely. The months of abuse, of being told he should be grateful, of watching adults choose her over their children's safety, all came pouring out in a surge of volcanic rage. He didn't remember moving, he told me later. One moment he was standing there holding his phone, the next his fist was connecting with Lauren's face with all the force his 14-year-old body could generate. The sound of breaking bone echoed through the reception hall. Lauren went down hard, her dress billowing around her as she fell. Blood immediately began pouring from her nose, splattering across the white satin, turning her fairy tale into a horror show. Nathan didn't stop. Years of wrestling training took over as he followed her down, his fists finding their target again and again. It took 3 men to pull him off, including his Uncle James, who would later have to testify about the wild look in Nathan's eyes, the way he fought against their restraint like a trapped animal. Lauren lay on the floor, her face already swelling, blood pooling on the expensive marble. The photographer, still on autopilot, captured it all, images that would later become evidence in multiple trials. Michael knelt beside his bride, trying to stem the bleeding with cloth napkins while screaming for someone to call 911. Guests fled in panic, parents carrying crying children, elderly relatives helped quickly to cars. The string quartet abandoned their instruments, fleeing with everyone else. Within minutes, the perfect wedding had become a crime scene. Nathan stood in the grip of his relatives, blood on his rented tuxedo, breathing hard but calm. He looked at his father and spoke clearly enough for everyone still present to hear. I told you what she was doing. You didn't believe me. You chose her. This is what happens when you don't protect your children. The police arrived within minutes, followed closely by paramedics. They took Lauren away on a stretcher, her parents following the ambulance in their Mercedes, her mother still wailing about her baby girl. The officers took statements from shocked guests, collected the phone as evidence, photographed Nathan's bloody knuckles. They were surprisingly gentle with him, one older officer quietly saying he understood why Nathan had done what he did, though he still had to arrest him. I've wondered so many times what would have happened if I'd been there, if I hadn't been thousands of miles away, playing soldier while my child suffered. Would I have seen the signs earlier? Would Nathan have felt safe enough to tell me instead of feeling he had to handle it alone? The guilt of my absence during those crucial months still wakes me at night sometimes, even years later. Sarah later told me about those first days after I brought the boys to her house. How Nathan would patrol the hallways at night, checking locks, peering out windows. How Tommy would only eat if Nathan tasted the food first, afraid Lauren had somehow poisoned it. How both boys would panic if they heard a car door slam, certain she'd been released and was coming for them. The trauma manifested in countless ways. Nathan developed a compulsive hand-washing habit, scrubbing until his skin was raw, trying to clean away touches that had already scarred his psyche. He couldn't stand to have anyone behind him, always positioning himself with his back to walls. He flinched when female teachers approached his desk, earning him a reputation as difficult that followed him through high school. Tommy's symptoms were different but equally heartbreaking. He regressed developmentally, sucking his thumb again at 9 years old. He wet the bed nightly for months, crying with shame each morning. He couldn't bear to be touched, even for hugs, pulling away from any physical contact. He developed elaborate bedtime rituals, checking his closet 7 times, looking under the bed with a flashlight, barricading his door with toys. The legal proceedings dragged on for what felt like lifetimes. Every hearing meant taking time off work, paying for parking at the courthouse, sitting in rooms with Lauren's supporters who glared at us like we were the criminals. The victim advocates tried to shield us, but you can't escape the hatred in people's eyes, the whispered accusations, the signs calling you liars and homewreckers. Casey prepared us meticulously for trial, but nothing could really prepare us for the reality of facing Lauren in court. She'd transformed herself for the proceedings. Gone was the sleek blonde hair and designer clothes. Instead, she appeared in conservative suits and glasses I'd never seen her wear, her hair dyed brown and pulled back severely. She looked like a librarian, not a predator. Her legal team was ruthless. They hired experts to testify about false memories in children. They brought in character witnesses who painted Lauren as a dedicated teacher, a volunteer at church, a woman who'd never had so much as a parking ticket. They suggested I'd planted these ideas in my boys' heads as revenge for Michael remarrying. They painted Nathan as a violent teenager with anger issues. But the truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deeply buried. The other victims Lauren's family had paid off over the years came forward, brave souls who'd carried their trauma in silence until they heard about our case. One by one, they took the stand and told their stories. A boy from Michigan, now 22, who Lauren had tutored when he was 13. A girl from Ohio, now 19, who'd been in Lauren's church youth group. A boy from Pennsylvania, now 16, whose family had been friends with Lauren's parents. Each testimony revealed the same pattern. The grooming that started slowly, the escalation, the threats to stay quiet, the families who chose not to believe or were paid to disappear. The defense tried to keep these testimonies out, arguing they were prejudicial, but the judge ruled the pattern of behavior was relevant. Lauren sat through it all with that same cold expression, occasionally dabbing at dry eyes for the jury's benefit. Michael's testimony was perhaps the most damaging to Lauren's defense. Under oath, he admitted Nathan had come to him 3 months before the wedding. He described how Nathan had cried, begged him to make Lauren leave. He admitted dismissing it as teenage jealousy, choosing to believe Lauren's explanation that Nathan was just having trouble adjusting. The guilt in his voice was palpable as he described finding Tommy's bruises after the wedding, realizing his son had been right all along. The extended family members testified too, each admitting their role in dismissing Nathan's pleas for help. His grandfather broke down on the stand, describing how he'd laughed off Nathan's concerns, making that horrible joke about wishing he'd had that problem at 14. The man looked decades older than when I'd last seen him, guilt having carved deep lines in his face. He looked at Nathan and said, "I'm sorry," in a voice so broken, it made even the prosecutor pause. Emily testified about the Easter dinner when Nathan had tried to tell her, She remembered now, she said, how he'd pulled her aside, how his hands had shaken, how she'd been distracted by her own pregnancy announcement and hadn't really listened. She described going home that night and telling her husband about Nathan's dramatic behaviour, both of them laughing about teenage hormones. She couldn't look at Nathan as she spoke, tears running down her face. Even Lauren's parents eventually broke under questioning. Her father admitted to the previous incidents, the therapy they'd paid for, the families they'd quietly compensated to avoid charges. He revealed they'd moved states 3 times in 10 years, always after incidents with Lauren. Her mother wailed that they'd tried everything, therapy, medication, even a stint in a private facility, but nothing had worked. The revelation that Lauren's family had known she was a predator and continued to enable her by moving her to new hunting grounds sent shockwaves through the community. The prosecutor added charges for them too, conspiracy to conceal child abuse, though they'd eventually plea bargain their way to probation and fines. Money and good lawyers still buy a certain amount of justice, apparently. Throughout the trial, I watched my boys suffer through the retelling of their trauma. Nathan sat straight and still during his testimony, speaking in a clear voice that only shook when he described finding Lauren in Tommy's room. He answered every horrible question the defense threw at him, never wavering from his truth. When they suggested he'd wanted the attention, that teenage boys couldn't be victims of attractive women, he simply asked them if they'd say the same thing if the genders were reversed. Tommy's testimony was done via closed-circuit television, the judge ruling he was too traumatized to be in the same room as his abuser. Even so, Lauren managed to make her presence felt, crying loudly enough to be heard in the other room, her lawyer objecting to every question. But Tommy persevered, his small voice describing the monster who came to his room, the pain she caused, the threats she made. The physical evidence was overwhelming once experts examined it properly. The photos Nathan had taken showed clear evidence of abuse. The bruises on Tommy's body were documented in medical reports that made several jurors visibly ill. The timeline Casey had constructed showed opportunity and access. The digital evidence Corey had uncovered revealed the depths of Lauren's deception, her calculated attempts to frame me. After 5 days of testimony and 3 hours of deliberation, the jury returned guilty verdicts on all counts. Lauren didn't react, sitting stone-faced as the judge read each verdict. Guilty of sexual abuse of a minor, guilty of sexual assault, guilty of witness intimidation, guilty of evidence tampering. The list went on, each guilty a small vindication for what my boys had endured. The sentencing hearing came 6 weeks later. Victims were allowed to give impact statements, and Nathan chose to speak. He stood at that podium, my brave warrior of a son, and described how Lauren had stolen parts of his childhood he'd never get back. He talked about the nightmares, the therapy, the way he couldn't trust anyone anymore. He spoke about watching his brother suffer and feeling responsible for not protecting him sooner. His voice broke only once when he said he forgave himself for not being strong enough to stop her sooner. Gave my own statement, describing the destruction of our family, the career I'd lost, the thousands of dollars in therapy bills, the innocence stolen from my children. I looked directly at Lauren as I spoke about the nights I held my crying sons, the years of healing ahead of them, the scars they'd carry forever. She stared back with those empty eyes, no trace of remorse or humanity. The judge sentenced her to 15 years with the possibility of parole after 7. It felt like both too much and not enough. She'd serve her time in a facility 2 states away, segregated from general population for her own safety. Female predators, especially those who hurt children, don't fare well in prison. I felt no sympathy for whatever might await her there. The civil suits followed the criminal trial. We sued Lauren's parents for enabling her predatory behavior, documenting how they'd moved her from state to state to avoid consequences. The settlement was substantial, enough to ensure both boys would have therapy and support through college and beyond. We also sued Michael for failure to protect, though that felt more like a formality. He'd already voluntarily given up custody and committed to paying for Tommy's care. The aftermath was in many ways harder than the trial itself. Nathan had to return to school where everyone knew what had happened. Some kids were cruel, making jokes about him being molested, suggesting he must have enjoyed it. Others treated him like broken glass, afraid to interact normally. He ate lunch alone most days, threw himself into his studies, counted days until graduation. His therapy was intensive and painful. Twice weekly sessions where he had to relive the trauma, process the guilt, work through the anger. His therapist specialized in male survivors of sexual abuse, one of too few in our area. She helped him understand that his violent response, while legally wrong, was psychologically understandable given the circumstances and his age. He developed coping mechanisms slowly. Art became an outlet, dark paintings that gradually lightened as healing progressed. He started writing poetry, raw verses about survival and strength. He volunteered at the animal shelter long after his required hours were complete, finding peace in caring for abandoned creatures who trusted despite past hurts. Tommy's healing journey was different but equally challenging. Living with Sarah's family provided the stability he needed, but the trauma ran deep. Night terrors plagued him for over a year. He'd wake screaming about the monster coming for him, requiring constant reassurance that Lauren was locked away. His adoptive siblings were patient and kind, but it was hard for them too, living with the aftermath of someone else's evil. Play therapy helped Tommy process what words couldn't express. Through dolls and drawings, he showed his therapist the fear, the pain, the confusion of being hurt by someone who was supposed to be a safe adult. Slowly, painfully, he began to separate his experience from his self-worth, to understand that what happened to him didn't define who he was. My own journey was complex. The guilt of not being there when my children needed me most was crushing. I threw myself into therapy too, working through the rage at every adult who'd failed them, including myself. I had to process the loss of my military career, the future I'd planned, the promotion that would never come. I had to learn to forgive myself for choosing duty over presence, for believing my children were safe with their father. The support groups helped immensely. Meeting other parents whose children had been abused, hearing their stories, sharing our pain and slow progress toward healing. We formed bonds forged in shared trauma, understanding each other in ways people who hadn't lived this nightmare couldn't. Some became lifelong friends, the kind who understood when you called crying at 2 a.m. because your child had another nightmare. 5 years have passed now since that phone call changed everything. 5 years of therapy, court dates, sleepless nights, and small victories. Nathan is in college, studying social work with a focus on helping abuse victims. He wants to be the advocate he needed, the adult who believes children the first time they ask for help. He still has bad days, times when the memories overwhelm him, but they're fewer and farther between. He's even begun dating, carefully, slowly, with a sweet girl who knows his history and respects his boundaries. Watching him learn to trust again, to allow himself vulnerability, has been beautiful and heartbreaking. He's reclaiming parts of himself. Lauren tried to steal, proving that survival is the best revenge. Tommy is a teenager now, taller than me, voice cracking as it changes. He plays soccer with fierce determination, all that anxiety channeled into athletic achievement. He still checks his door locks at night, still needs routine and predictability, but he laughs now, real, genuine laughter that lights up his whole face. He's even started talking about college, about becoming a pediatrician to help kids like him. Sarah's family officially adopted him 2 years ago in a ceremony that had everyone crying. He chose to keep Nathan as his middle name, honoring the brother who saved him. Their bond remains unbreakable, forged in shared trauma but sustained by genuine love. They text daily despite the distance, Nathan driving home from college whenever Tommy has a bad day. The extended family has slowly, painfully rebuilt some connections. Michael's parents send birthday cards and Christmas gifts, always with notes of apology. Emily had her baby, a little girl she named Hope, and she's teaching her from birth about body safety and consent. James volunteers with an organisation educating people about recognising abuse signs. They're trying to atone, to turn their failure into future prevention. Michael himself has become an advocate in his own way. He speaks at parenting workshops about the signs he missed, the way predators groom not just children but entire families. He's remarried carefully this time. to a woman who underwent extensive background checks and therapy before being introduced to the boys. Nathan gave a speech at their small wedding, saying he was glad his father had found real love this time. The foundation we started has helped dozens of families navigate the legal system after abuse. We provide emergency therapy funding, legal referrals, and most importantly, belief. Every child who walks through our doors hears what Nathan needed to hear. We believe you. It's not your fault. You're brave for speaking up. We're going to help. I retired from the military quietly, my 20 years complete but my career forever marked by that reprimand. Sometimes I wonder where I'd be if none of this had happened, what rank I might have achieved, what assignments I might have had. Then I look at my boys, alive and healing, and know I'd make the same choices again. Some things matter more than careers. Lauren remains in prison, her appeals exhausted. I receive updates occasionally from the prosecutor about her status. She's been disciplined multiple times for inappropriate behavior with younger inmates. She refuses therapy, maintains her innocence despite overwhelming evidence. Her parents visit monthly, still enabling, still making excuses. Some people never learn. Sometimes I'm asked if I forgive her. The honest answer is no. I've forgiven myself, forgiven the family members who failed my boys through ignorance rather than malice. But Lauren, she knew exactly what she was doing. She chose to hurt children repeatedly, systematically, without remorse. Some acts are unforgivable, and that's okay. Forgiveness isn't required for healing. What I've learned through this journey is that healing isn't linear. It's not a steady upward climb, but a winding path with setbacks and breakthroughs. Some days the trauma feels fresh, triggered by a smell, a sound, a news story about another predator. Other days it feels like ancient history, something that happened to different people in a different life. I've learned that children are both more fragile and more resilient than we imagine. That trauma leaves scars but doesn't have to define futures. That speaking truth, even when it costs everything, is always worth it. That justice delayed is still justice, and imperfect justice is better than none at all. I've learned that family isn't just blood, but the people who show up when your world implodes. Sarah, who took us in without question. Casey, who fought for us like we were her own family. The therapists who patiently helped us piece ourselves back together. The other survivors who shared their stories to help convict our abuser. These people are family in ways DNA could never make them. Most importantly, I've learned that love isn't just a feeling but an action. It's Nathan choosing violence to protect his brother when every other option failed. It's staying up all night with a child afraid to sleep. It's fighting a system designed to protect predators with good lawyers. It's rebuilding after destruction, choosing hope when despair would be easier. That Tuesday morning phone call shattered my carefully constructed life. But from those shards, we've built something stronger. Not perfect, not unmarked by trauma, but real and honest and fiercely protective of the vulnerable. My boys are survivors, not victims. They're warriors who fought battles children shouldn't have to fight and won. Their scars tell a story of courage, of love that transcends fear, of truth that refuses to be silenced. Every day they choose to keep healing, keep growing, keep living full lives despite what was done to them is a victory. Every time they help another survivor speak their truth, refuse to let shame win, they reclaim power. Lauren tried to steal, so when people ask how I could be proud of my son for what he did at that wedding, I tell them this. He saved lives, not just Tommy's, but future victims who would have suffered if Lauren had remained free. He sacrificed his own innocence, his own future, his own freedom to protect someone smaller and more vulnerable. If that's not heroism, I don't know what is. Story doesn't end with they lived happily ever after, because real life doesn't work that way. It ends with they lived, they survived, they healed, they helped others heal. They turned their pain into purpose and their trauma into triumph. They proved that love is stronger than evil, that truth defeats lies, that children's voices matter when adults have the courage to listen. And somewhere out there, A child suffering in silence might hear this story and find their own voice, might find the courage to speak their truth no matter the cost, might know that someone, somewhere, believes them. That's why we tell it, why we relive the pain in the telling. Because silence protects predators, but truth protects children. So this is our truth, all of it. The ugly and the beautiful, the broken and the healing, the destruction and the rebuilding. It's a story I never wanted to live, but one I'll never stop telling. Because my son taught me that sometimes protecting the innocent requires getting your hands dirty. Sometimes saving people means being willing to be seen as the villain. Sometimes love looks like violence when violence is all that's left. And sometimes, just sometimes, a 14-year-old boy with bruised knuckles and a broken heart can change the world simply by refusing to let evil win. That's the legacy of that Tuesday morning in September. That's the gift hidden in the nightmare. That's the truth that sets us free. Even when freedom comes at the highest price. We paid that price. We're still paying it in therapy bills and nightmares and triggers that ambush us on random Tuesdays. But we're free. Free from silence. Free from shame. Free from a predator who counted on both to keep hunting. And that freedom, hard-won and blood-bought, is worth every single thing it cost. Because our children are safe, they're healing, they're helping others heal. And that's the only happily ever after that matters in real life. The kind where the monsters are locked away, the children are believed, and the truth finally sets everyone free. Even when that truth comes with bruised knuckles and broken hearts and phone calls that change everything, especially then.